Beginner guitar amps aren't known for having the best tones, and rightfully so, because they're kind of made for beginner players just entering into the guitar world. Now in this video, I'm going to be demoing a beginner amp, the 5-core 40-watt guitar amp. It's less than $100 and you can use it for electric, acoustic, or bass guitar. Now when 5-core reached out to me to demo this amp, I was actually sort of hesitant at first, but then I realized there are just thousands and thousands of beginner guitar players, maybe not every day, but every week, that are looking for a beginner amp that they can start with. So I decided to make this video for them, and I also wanted to challenge myself in getting the best tones I possibly can out of a beginner amp. So I'm gonna try and pull out the best sounds from it, show you how to dial in an amp properly, and then I'm gonna record like a little song with it to see how it comes out and how it sounds in a full mix with drums, synths, bass, and all that. I'll also give you some simple sound examples with the clean tones, the overdrives, all that. I'll give you my honest thoughts about this amp. I'll run my pedals through this amp and just show you everything that this thing can do. So let's get right into it, and I'll start with the demo sounds. Now all those sounds you just heard came straight from the amp. There was no effects, no pedals, none of that. As you could assume, the cleaner tones are much better compared to those overdrive tones, because the more you crank it on this amp, those overdrive sounds can get very harsh. And that's just a common theme in a lot of beginner amps. Super hard to get a really good overdrive tone. Now you also have to consider it's a 40-watt beginner guitar amp that's under $100. So you're getting what you pay for, and honestly, it's not a terrible deal. I think anyone who spends $100 on an amp is aware of what they're getting. Personally, I don't think the clean tones are even bad. And that's the funny thing about guitar gear. Sometimes that cheap amp can give you a fun and interesting tone that you otherwise would never really get with your more expensive stuff. Now that doesn't mean I would be recording with this amp all the time when I'm doing my sessions and I'm recording my songs, but this can give you a very like lo-fi-esque 80s-ish sort of guitar tone, especially when I add in some modulation pedals. Now, a feature that I have personally never seen on an amp before besides digital amps is the built-in delay. I actually really enjoyed playing with it. It gives you a really cool slapback guitar effect, which is a great effect for a beginner to use when they're playing blues, country, and rock. So now that you've heard what this amp can do by itself and you sort of understand what its strongest and weakest points are, I wanted to record a song with it and dial it in to the best of my abilities to make the guitar tone work with the mix. So what this means is that I dial it in perfectly with the guitar that I'm using. I will add in a mix of pedals, dial them in properly to make them sound great, reverbs, compressors, modulation, things like that. I'll mic this amp up perfectly to how I normally mic up all my other amps. I'm basically going to try and get the best guitar tone I can without having to mix it too much post. And then with layers of synths, drums, bass, and things like that, we'll hear how it sounds in a whole musical context. Now, I'm not going to alter the guitar tracks too much after I record them. I'm not going to throw in any EQ, but I may add in like some reverb and things like that. So give this tune a little listen and let me know what you think about it down in the comments. So let's now take a look at what we're working with and what we have on this amp. So we have two inputs, passive and active, and then we have a gain knob. In order to access this, you need to press in the boost button that is right next to it. So all the way pressed in, the gain is active, off, this gain knob is now off. Then we have a basic EQ, treble, middle, and bass, pretty standard stuff. Now this amp in general is very bright. Normally on a lot of amps, I crank the treble pretty high, between like 6 and 8, but on this, honestly, I'd like to keep it under 6 at least. Middle, I don't really crank this too high, maybe between 5 and 7, maybe even 4 and 7. And then bass, I will bring this higher than 6, between 6 and 9. Now this is a good starting point for most guitars because like I said, this amp can sound very, very bright and sometimes piercing if you have the treble or middle knobs cranked too high. Now getting into what I was talking about earlier about the delay featured within this amp, we have a time and repeat knob. Now repeat, if it's cranked, you're going to get a lot of delay lines after when you play, and then time, this sort of adjusts the time between when you play the guitar and when you hear the delay effect again. So when you have the time knob cranked, there is just a couple seconds delay in between when you play and when you'll hear that delay effect. When you bring this down, this is when you can get into that slap back effect, which is really, really cool. Then you have the master volume knob for all of this. Now we also have a microphone input, which is really, really great. So if you're playing acoustic guitar and you also want to hear your vocals, you can plug in both acoustic and a microphone. And then this is the volume for the mic. Then we also have a line out, a headphone in, and a aux in, so you can play some of your favorite songs through the amp and play with it. And then of course we just have our power switch. So here are my final and honest thoughts. This is a cheap beginner amp, mainly for someone who is just starting out playing guitar. Honestly, I actually sort of enjoy the clean tone, especially when I add in pedals like compression, reverb, and all that. Honestly, I do that with any amp that I own. All my tube amps, you know, I'm always putting on pedals anyway. So now within the context of a whole song, I think it sits well with a good balance and a good adjustments of all the knobs and really dialing in the proper sound, but that goes for any amp that you'd be playing. You just have to figure out what the best way to dial in your tone is with your guitar, your pedals, and things like that. All in all, for under $100, you really can't go wrong with it because this isn't made for professionals. It's made for a beginner guitar player just entering into the guitar amp world. Now let me know what your thoughts are on this amp and beginner amps in general. And thanks as always for watching, and I will see you in the next video.